The Body Counter, a gripping and unpredictable novel that will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. Join Sarah as she uncovers a dangerous conspiracy involving illegal body part trade and faces unexpected challenges along the way. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling content. Chapter 1: A Gruesome Discovery. Sarah had been working at the morgue for 6 months now, but she still couldn't shake off the eerie feeling that came with handling dead bodies. The smell of formaldehyde and the sight of lifeless bodies lying on the tables sent shivers down her spine. But despite her discomfort, Sarah found solace in the routine of her job. That was until she made a gruesome discovery that would change everything. As she was preparing to conduct an autopsy on the latest body that had been brought in, Sarah noticed something odd. The body had a fresh incision that wasn't made by the medical examiner. She called over her colleague, who confirmed her suspicions. This body had been tampered with. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the situation. Who would do this? And why? She couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this was just the tip of the iceberg. She knew she had to report it to the authorities. Later that day, Sarah found herself sitting across from Detective Monroe, recounting the events of that morning. Monroe listened intently, scribbling notes in his pad. When Sarah finished, he looked up at her with a stern expression. "We take this very seriously, Mississippi. We'll be launching an investigation into this matter immediately. You did the right thing by reporting it to us." Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. She had done the right thing. But as she left the station and walked to her car, she couldn't shake off the feeling that she was being watched. Chapter 2: The Investigation Begins. The next day, Sarah arrived at the morgue to find a flurry of activity. Police officers and detectives were scouring the premises, collecting evidence and conducting interviews. Sarah approached Detective Monroe, who was busy examining the incision on the body that had sparked the investigation. "Good morning, Detective. Is there anything I can do to help with the investigation?" Sarah asked. Monroe looked up at her and nodded. "Actually, I wanted to speak to you about something. We received an anonymous tip that there may be some illegal activity going on at the morgue. Have you noticed anything suspicious or out of the ordinary?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Well, there have been a few instances where I've noticed incisions that weren't made by the medical examiner. But I didn't think much of it until yesterday." Monroe's expression turned serious. "I see. That's certainly something we'll need to look into. Can you think of anyone who might be involved in this?" Sarah shook her head. "I'm not sure. But there is one person who comes to mind. Dr. Thompson, the head of the morgue. He's always been very secretive and dismissive of anyone who asks too many questions." Monroe nodded. "We'll definitely be speaking to him. Thanks for bringing this to our attention, Mississippi. We'll keep you updated on the investigation." As Sarah left the morgue, she couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. She knew she had done the right thing by speaking up, but she couldn't help but feel like she was putting herself in danger. Chapter 3: A Threatening Message. That night, Sarah was at home when she received a call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously, unsure of who was on the other end of the line. "Hello?" she said tentatively. A deep, ominous voice responded. "Miss Sarah, I suggest you keep your mouth shut if you know what's good for you. You don't want to find yourself in the middle of something you can't handle." Sarah's heart raced as she tried to make sense of the threat. Was this connected to the investigation at the morgue? She knew she had to tell Detective Monroe about the call. The next day, Sarah arrived at the station and was immediately directed to Monroe's office. He looked up as she entered, his expression grave. "I'm glad you're here, Mississippi. We received a call from an anonymous source last night, threatening you. We take these threats very seriously, and I want you to know that we're doing everything we can to ensure your safety." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. She knew she was in good hands with Monroe and his team. But at the same time, she couldn't help but feel like she was in over her head. She had never been involved in anything like this before, and the thought of being in danger was terrifying. As she left the station, Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. She had to find out who was behind all of this and put an end to it once and for all. Chapter 4: A Suspicious Meeting. Sarah spent the next few days going about her usual routine at the morgue, but she couldn't shake off the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she turned around, she felt like someone was watching her. One day, as she was leaving work, she saw a shadowy figure lurking in the parking lot. She quickly got into her car and locked the doors, but her heart was pounding as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The next day, she received a note in her locker that read, "Meet me at midnight, behind the morgue. Come alone." She knew she shouldn't go, but her curiosity got the best of her. As she arrived at the back of the morgue, she saw a figure emerge from the shadows. It was Dr. Thompson, the head of the morgue. "Miss Sarah, I'm sorry for the scare. I needed to meet with you to discuss something important," he said in a hushed tone. Sarah was hesitant, but she listened as he explained that he had uncovered evidence of illegal activity at the morgue. He believed that some of the staff members were involved in a body parts trade, and he wanted to put an end to it. "I need your help, Mississippi. I can't do this alone," he pleaded. Sarah was conflicted. She didn't know who to trust anymore, but she couldn't ignore the possibility of taking down a dangerous operation. She agreed to help Dr. Thompson, but she knew that the risks were higher than ever. Chapter 5: A Risky Plan. With Dr. Thompson's help, Sarah had access to files and documents that confirmed her suspicions. There was indeed an illegal body parts trade happening at the morgue, and some of her colleagues were involved. Together, they hatched a plan to gather evidence and catch the perpetrators in the act. Sarah would wear a hidden camera and microphone, and Dr. Thompson would set up a meeting with the suspected members of the operation. Sarah knew that the risks were high, but she was determined to see this through. As the day of the meeting arrived, she felt a mixture of fear and excitement. This was her chance to make a difference and put an end to the illegal activity. As she sat in the car, waiting for Dr. Thompson to arrive, she heard a loud knock on the window. She turned to see Detective Monroe, his face stern. "Miss Sarah, what do you think you're doing? This is too dangerous. I can't let you do this alone," he said, concern in his voice. Sarah knew that he was right, but she also knew that this was her chance to make a difference. She convinced Monroe to let her go ahead with the plan, but he agreed to keep a close eye on her and to intervene if things went wrong. As she made her way to the meeting spot, Sarah knew that the risks were higher than ever. But she also knew that this was her chance to make a difference and to stop the illegal trade of body parts once and for all. Chapter 6: A Shocking Discovery. Sarah arrived at the meeting spot, feeling nervous and unsure. She could see the suspects in the distance, and her heart raced as she approached them. Dr. Thompson had already set up the cameras and microphones, and they were ready to catch them in the act. But as Sarah approached, one of the suspects saw her and alerted the others. They quickly realized that they had been set up, and a scuffle ensued. Sarah tried to escape, but one of the suspects grabbed her and held her tightly. As she struggled to break free, she noticed something strange. The suspect had a scar on his arm that looked familiar. Suddenly, it clicked. She had seen that same scar before, on one of the bodies at the morgue. It was one of the missing body parts that had been sold illegally. Sarah's heart raced as she realized the full extent of the operation. They weren't just selling body parts, they were stealing them from the morgue. She knew that they needed to act fast to stop them. As Detective Monroe and the police arrived on the scene, the suspects were arrested and the evidence was gathered. Sarah's suspicions had been confirmed, and the illegal operation had been shut down. But as Sarah left the morgue that day, she couldn't shake off the feeling that there was still more to uncover. She knew that the conspiracy ran deeper than she could ever imagine. Chapter 7: The Trail Continues. With the operation shut down and the suspects in custody, Sarah thought that her job was done. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that there was still more to uncover. She started digging deeper, looking for any connections or leads that could help her uncover the full extent of the conspiracy. It was risky, but she couldn't stop now. As she went through the files and documents, she noticed a familiar name. It was one of the higher-ups in the city government, someone she had met before. She couldn't believe it. Was it possible that they were involved too? Sarah knew that this was a big risk, but she also knew that it was her duty to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. She set up a meeting with the official, hoping to get more information. As she sat across from him, she could feel his eyes on her, studying her every move. She could tell that he was uncomfortable, but she didn't back down. She asked him straight up if he was involved in the illegal operation. At first, he denied it, but as Sarah pressed him further, he cracked. He admitted to being involved in the operation, but he also revealed something even more shocking. The operation was just the tip of the iceberg. There was something much bigger at play, something that went beyond the morgue and the body parts trade. Sarah's mind raced as she realized the full extent of the conspiracy. This was bigger than anything she had ever imagined, and she knew that it was going to be risky to uncover the truth. Chapter 8: The Dangerous Game. Sarah knew that she had to tread carefully. She had uncovered a massive conspiracy that went beyond what she ever thought was possible. She couldn't trust anyone, not even her colleagues at the morgue. She started working with Detective Monroe again, sharing what she had discovered. They both knew that this was going to be a dangerous game, and that they had to be careful. As they dug deeper, they discovered that the conspiracy was linked to some of the most powerful people in the city. They had to be careful, as they knew that their every move was being watched. One night, Sarah received a call from an unknown number. It was a warning, telling her to back off, or she would suffer the consequences. Sarah was scared, but she refused to back down. She knew that she was on the right track, and that the truth needed to be exposed. As they got closer to the truth, things started getting more dangerous. They were being followed, and they knew that they had to be careful. But they were determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. One day, as they were going through some old files, they discovered something that would change everything. It was a list of names, including some of the most powerful people in the city. They were all involved in the conspiracy. Sarah knew that they had to act fast. They had the evidence they needed to take down the entire operation, but they also knew that they were in danger. Chapter 9: The Final Showdown. Sarah and Detective Monroe knew that they had to act fast. They had the evidence they needed to take down the entire conspiracy, but they also knew that they were in danger. They went to the police with their evidence, and together, they formulated a plan to take down the operation once and for all. They organized a sting operation, gathering all of the suspects in one place. It was a risky move, but they knew that it was the only way to catch them in the act. As they waited for the suspects to arrive, Sarah's heart was pounding. She knew that this was going to be the final showdown, the moment where everything would come to a head. The suspects arrived, and the operation began. But the police were waiting for them. They caught the suspects in the act, and they were all arrested. As Sarah watched the suspects being led away in handcuffs, she felt a sense of relief. They had done it. They had uncovered the truth and taken down the entire operation. But there was still one more thing to do. They had to confront the mastermind behind the entire conspiracy. As they arrived at the mastermind's office, Sarah could feel her heart racing. She was about to confront the person who had orchestrated the entire operation. But as they entered the room, they found that the mastermind was already dead, having committed suicide before they arrived. Sarah couldn't believe it. The person who had caused so much pain and suffering had escaped justice. But as she looked around the room, she saw something that gave her hope. It was a file containing all of the information about the operation, including the names of all of the people involved. Sarah knew that this was enough to bring them all to justice. She took the file and left the room, ready to expose the truth to the world. Chapter 10: the aftermath. After the successful takedown of the conspiracy, life slowly returned to normal for Sarah. The morgue was no longer involved in the illegal trade of body parts, and the city was a safer place. However, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The mastermind behind the operation had escaped justice, and that left a bitter taste in her mouth. One day, Sarah received a call from Detective Monroe. He told her that they had finally uncovered the identity of the mastermind. It was someone that Sarah knew all too well, her own boss at the morgue. Sarah was shocked. She had never suspected that her boss was involved in the conspiracy. But the evidence was irrefutable, and her boss was arrested. As the news of the conspiracy spread, the city was rocked by scandal. Many of the most powerful people in the city were implicated, and they were all brought to justice. Sarah received numerous accolades for her role in uncovering the conspiracy. But she knew that it was a team effort, and that she couldn't have done it without the help of Detective Monroe and the rest of the police force. In the end, Sarah realized that justice had been served. The people responsible for the illegal trade of body parts had been brought to justice, and the city was safer because of it. As she walked out of the police station, Sarah felt a sense of pride. She had done something important, and she knew that she would always be remembered as the person who helped bring down the conspiracy. Chapter 11: Closure. It had been several months since the takedown of the conspiracy, and life had finally returned to normal for Sarah. But even though the danger had passed, Sarah still couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. One day, Sarah received a letter in the mail. It was from the mastermind behind the conspiracy, who had committed suicide before he could be brought to justice. Sarah hesitated for a moment before opening the letter, unsure of what to expect. But as she read it, she felt a sense of closure that she had never felt before. In the letter, the mastermind confessed to his crimes and apologized for the pain that he had caused. He explained that he had been driven by greed and a desire for power, and that he had lost sight of what was truly important in life. Sarah read the letter several times, taking in every word. She felt a sense of sadness for the mastermind, but she also felt a sense of relief. Finally, she could put the entire ordeal behind her and move on with her life. As she walked out of her apartment, Sarah felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. She knew that she could finally move on and leave the past behind. But even though the conspiracy was over, Sarah knew that she would never forget the experience. It had changed her, and she was a different person because of it. As she looked out at the city skyline, Sarah felt a sense of hope. The world was full of darkness and danger, but there was also light and hope. She knew that she would never forget the lessons that she had learned, and that she would always be grateful for the experience that had shaped her into the person she was today. Chapter 12: The New Beginning. Sarah had finally come to terms with the events of the past few months. She had moved on from the conspiracy, but she knew that it would always be a part of her. One day, Sarah received a call from Detective Monroe. He told her that he had a new case for her, one that he thought would interest her. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure if she was ready for another case. But as she listened to Detective Monroe explain the details, she felt a familiar sense of excitement building inside her. The case involved a missing person, a young woman who had disappeared without a trace. The police had few leads, and they were desperate for any help they could get. Sarah knew that she couldn't turn her back on the opportunity to help. She agreed to take the case, and she threw herself into the investigation with all her energy. As she delved deeper into the case, Sarah felt a sense of familiarity. The woman's disappearance reminded her of the conspiracy, and she knew that she couldn't rest until she had found the missing woman. With each passing day, Sarah felt herself becoming more and more invested in the case. She worked tirelessly, following every lead and leaving no stone unturned. Finally, after weeks of investigation, Sarah received a breakthrough. She had discovered a lead that she knew could crack the case wide open. As she raced to follow the lead, Sarah felt a sense of excitement building inside her. She knew that she was close to finding the missing woman, and she couldn't wait to see the look of relief on her family's faces. As she approached the address where the lead had pointed her, Sarah felt a sense of nervousness. She didn't know what to expect, and she knew that the situation could be dangerous. But as she pushed open the door and stepped inside, she knew that she had made the right decision. The missing woman was there, safe and sound, and Sarah knew that she had played a part in bringing her home. As she walked out of the house with the missing woman, Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction that she had never felt before. She knew that this was why she had become a detective, and she couldn't wait for her next case. Chapter 13: The Truth Uncovered. Sarah was on a new case, and it was unlike any other she had ever worked on. The case involved a wealthy businessman who had been accused of embezzlement, fraud, and bribery. The businessman, Lysander, had been at the top of his game for years, and he was revered by many in the business world. But now, he was facing serious charges that could destroy his entire career. As Sarah began her investigation, she found that the case was much more complex than she had initially thought. There were layers of deception and lies, and it seemed as though everyone involved had something to hide. As she dug deeper, Sarah began to uncover the truth behind Lysander's success. She found that he had been involved in shady deals for years, and that his rise to power had been built on a foundation of corruption. The more Sarah uncovered, the more she realized just how deep the conspiracy went. There were politicians, bankers, and even some law enforcement officials involved. Sarah knew that she was treading on dangerous ground, but she refused to back down. She was determined to bring Lysander to justice, no matter what it took. As she continued to investigate, Sarah found herself getting closer and closer to the truth. And finally, after months of hard work and determination, she had everything she needed to take down Lysander and his network of accomplices. Sarah worked with the police to orchestrate a takedown, and the operation was a success. Lysander and his accomplices were arrested, and the truth was finally revealed to the public. As Sarah walked out of the courthouse, she felt a sense of pride and satisfaction that she had never felt before. She knew that she had made a difference, and that she had brought justice to those who had been wronged. Chapter 14: the final showdown. Sarah had thought that the Alexander Kim case would be the biggest challenge of her career, but she was wrong. There was still one more enemy to face, and it was someone she never expected. It all started with a simple call from an unknown number. Sarah answered, expecting it to be just another telemarketer, but instead, she heard a familiar voice on the other end. "Hello, Sarah," the voice said. "It's been a while." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was the voice of the man she had been hunting for years, the man who had killed her brother. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want to play a game," the man said. "A game of cat and mouse." Sarah knew she shouldn't take the bait, but she couldn't help herself. She needed to face the man who had destroyed her family. "Where do you want to meet?" Sarah asked. The man gave her an address, and Sarah knew that it was a trap. But she didn't care. She was ready for the final showdown. Sarah arrived at the address, and she was met by a dark figure in a hoodie. She couldn't see his face, but she knew it was him. They stood there, facing each other in silence, for what felt like an eternity. And then, without warning, the man lunged at Sarah with a knife. Sarah was ready for him, and she dodged his attack. The two began to fight, and Sarah found herself fighting for her life. It was a brutal fight, but in the end, Sarah emerged victorious. She had finally taken down the man who had caused her so much pain and suffering. As she looked down at the man's lifeless body, Sarah felt a sense of closure. She knew that she had avenged her brother, and that she had made the world a better place. Chapter 15: A New Beginning. Sarah sat in her car, staring out at the city skyline. It had been a long and tumultuous journey, but it was finally over. She had solved the case of the body parts conspiracy, taken down Alexander Kim and his network of accomplices, and even avenged her brother's death. But now, as Sarah looked out at the world before her, she realized that there was still so much left to do. There were still cases to be solved, injustices to be righted, and people to be helped. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a sense of renewed purpose. She knew that she couldn't change the world on her own, but she was determined to do her part. As she started her car and pulled out onto the road, Sarah knew that she was embarking on a new journey. A journey that would be full of challenges, but also full of hope and possibility. She was ready for whatever the future held, and she was excited to see where her path would take her.